Hello and welcome to another episode of Guess That Record. I am your host, Jackson Reed. This is the show where we talk about music and try to figure out which album I pulled from my collection. Thanks again to you, the listeners, for tuning in to another episode. Our guest is a record producer and composer who has been active since the 1970s. He's worked with artists like Dan Hill, Jimmy Webb, Billy Joel, and many more. He has a new book out now called Unplugged, and I'm super excited to be speaking with Fred Mollin. How are you doing, Fred?
I'm really good, thank you.
Absolutely, yeah. So where are we talking to you from today?
In Nashville, Tennessee.
Oh, nice. I went to Nashville, I guess it would have been about 6 years ago, and I actually performed with my own band there, and yeah, it's a cool town.
Lovely.
Mm-hmm.
Where'd you play?
Well, it was a small place, like definitely off Broadway. It was called Twin Kegs 2. Yeah, it was just like kind of a hole in the wall place, but it was packed and everyone loved it. So yeah, good time.
Cool.
Yeah. So it's awesome to be speaking with you today because it was like really interesting to look through, your career and just see like all the amazing things that you've done and been a part of. So I'm really excited to learn more about your career today.
Thank you. Well, any questions you have, I'm going to try to answer.
Right on. To start off with, I always love to ask, what's the first song or the first album you remember hearing that made you take music seriously?
Well, I can tell you the first record I bought because I had my mother at age 4. I had to have her drive me to the record store in our town to buy Diana by Paul Anka, which was recorded in 1957. So, I don't know if you know that song or not, but it was a big hit and, had the lyrics that were perfect for a 4-year-old. But it was very rock and roll and it was a big up-tempo sort of love rock and roll ballad, and it was great. And it definitely, I remember saying to my mom, oh, I really want to get Diana. Will you take me to the record store?
Awesome. And then, it's interesting because I'm Canadian, and it was, it was fascinating to see that, like, once you decided to sort of pursue music, you actually ended up in Toronto. And the other crazy thing that I saw was that you were on a CBC TV show up here, which is like, that's pretty cool. So how did that all come together for you?
Well, first of all, and by the way, I'm Canadian and American because I immigrated there when I was 17, and then I became a green card a guy, and then landed immigrancy, they called it, and but then years later I became a full-on citizen as well as American. I'm very, very much more a Canadian in my mind and my soul than I am American, but I feel I am definitely a dual citizen with dual allegiances, but I certainly feel I love Canada, and and that's truly where my heart is. I was doing, there were 2 times I did CBC television. One was early on in my career. I was in Toronto, and my brother had a improvisational comedy group with 2 other guys, and they made me the 4th member. And we did a lot of improvisational comedy all over Ontario, mostly Toronto. And then we, for some reason, got CBC TV interested in us, and they offered us a kids show, and a 4:30 in the afternoon show for sort of young, not too young, but sort of, probably ages maybe 7 to 11 or something. And we did a Monty Python sort of weekly show for kids. I mean, it was very, very, on some levels, it was probably insensitive to their ages because we did 3 seasons, and there were definitely things that really weren't really fit for children. But somehow we got through those years, and they loved the show. And so I did those 3 years on CBC, which of course is like the BBC in England. It's the Canadian Broadcasting Company is the government's owned broadcasting company. And then years later, in '87, I went back on camera to be sort of a Paul Schaefer to a guy named Ted Wallachin's David Letterman. And we did a year of a series called It's Only Rock and Roll. in 1987 on CBC, and we had fantastic guests. It was a comedy and music series, and I was a co-host, and it was so much fun. I mean, that was a great year.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny how it's like, I feel like typically it's sort of like you see Canadians in entertainment anyways, you know, their goal is to get to the US and have success in the US. And you don't often see it the other way around. So it's kind of interesting in your case how, yeah, you went up here first, basically.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Yeah, everyone wanted to come down to the US, and I just remember in 72, I had left school when I was 16. So 1969 in Long Island, New York, I left high school to pursue music. And at that point, I was a singer-songwriter, or want to be a singer-songwriter. And I was very serious about it. And I started to play gigs, but I didn't really have a lot of luck in New York, even though I was only 45 minutes away by train. I had no connections in the record or show business side of things. And so my brother had moved to Toronto to check out the underground theater scene in 72. So after about 3 years of me banging my head against locked doors, I went to visit him in Toronto, and I really never left
Hmm.
because
Yeah.
all of a sudden I had a record deal and a girlfriend and college gigs.
Yeah. And of course, being in Toronto, it led you to work with Dan Hill, where you sort of got your big break. So how did that opportunity come together?
Well, clearly you've been reading either the PR sheet or you've actually read the book, which is great. Um, Dan Hill was another singer-songwriter that I was playing similar gigs with. Um, and he was really good, by the way. Like, we were both kids. I mean, in 72, I was, what was I, 19 or something. And Danny would have been 18. So, we were just making the rounds of different clubs in Toronto and college gigs. And, sometimes we'd be, playing one night, Dan would play the next night. And I sort of really loved him as a person. And he was very, very good live. He had a great voice, and the girls loved him. And he wrote a lot of emotional sort of singer-songwriter songs. And I was sort of more. I tried to be a tortured artist, but I really wasn't very tortured. So I did a lot of comedy in between my songs. But anyway, Dan and I struck up a friendship, and one day he asked if I would do um, sort of sit in as a producer on a vocal and guitar demo. And this must have been 1973. So I was 20 and Dan was 19. And he brought in his friend, Matt McCauley, who he had grown up with in the suburbs of Toronto. And Matt had really had again, very gifted and had a tremendous leg up because his father was a big musical director in Canada. So Matt learned at his father's feet. And Dan created a creative blind date for us because he really felt Matt and I would make a great pair. And so basically, Matt and I, after the first couple hours of really not knowing who each other was and being sort of competitive, we really fell into a lovely groove and became lifelong best friends. And over the next 5 or 6 years, Matt and I produced records together until about 81 when Matt left the music side of things. But it really was Dan that really created, the chance for me to produce. And I liked it, by the way. I started to produce and arrange music for another person, for an artist. I really felt I had found my calling.
This episode of Guess That Record is sponsored by Marvel Marketing. Marvel Marketing is an award-winning digital marketing company headquartered in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. Working with clients in different industries from all over North America, including Canada, the United States, and Mexico. Marvel Marketing services include website design and development, website maintenance, search engine optimization, public relations services, and social media management, amongst others. To find out more, visit marvelmarketing.ca. This episode of Guess That Record is sponsored by GuitarWorks. One of Canada's top independent music stores for over 30 years, GuitarWorks carries a huge selection of musical instruments from the biggest brands in music, including Gibson, Fender, Martin, Yamaha, and Paul Reed Smith. Visit any of their 2 Calgary locations or shop online at guitarworks.ca and join the Guitar Perks program to earn money back with every purchase. GuitarWorks, your total guitar store. This episode of Guess That Record is also sponsored by Recordland, home to the largest selection of music in Canada. Buy, sell, and trade tapes, CDs, and vinyl. Located in Calgary's Inglewood neighborhood on 9th Avenue Southeast, visit them in person or on Instagram at Recordland Calgary. And it's crazy how young you were, and producing a record is pretty, it's a pretty in-depth position. So how did you kind of learn the tools of the trade, I guess?
Well, that's a great question. Thank you. Well, first of all, record production is really not. It really should be called record direction, because it's like a director in a film. You're
Mhm.
involved in all the aspects of making that film, and a record producer is someone who directs the record. But the difference is, we're working, or the way I'd like to believe we're working to benefit the artist completely. They have the final say, and we do everything we can as a producer to bring the artist's vision to reality and fulfill that vision, and at the same time have a great time doing it. So I think the key part of your question too is, how did we learn to do that? And we really just instinctually just tried things. And I think Matt and I were both musically talented. So I think we made a good team, and I think we just learned while we earned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And of course, with Dan Hill, Sometimes When We Touch was the big hit that really got things going for you. And then moving into the late 70s, early 80s, you start producing for artists like America and Jimmy Webb, who you've continued to work with all these years later. And
Yeah.
I was kind of curious about, like, once you kind of get established, how do you get the jobs? Like, do the bands come to you and say, "Hey, we want you to produce our record," or do you have to, pitch people? How does that work?
Well, these are great questions. The thing is, all of the above, basically. Sometimes people reach out because they've heard something you've done, and they say, "Gee, I like that record. Would you produce mine?" Sometimes I'll try to create an idea for an artist, and I'll reach out to them and say, "I've always heard you doing this cover album of these kinds of songs," and it can be anything. I mean, it just there's no rhyme or reason as a freelance producer how you get the work. I mean, you don't knock on the door unless you have a very good track record, because they're just going to say, "Well, thanks for nothing." But at the same time, I can knock on the door if I have a great concept or something, yeah, and I'll do that. But listen, a lot of times people will say, "Oh, I love this record so much. Would you produce mine?" Or a record label will say, "Gee, we looked at all your records. We like your work. We suggest you meet this artist." I mean, there's so many ways.
Hmm.
Jax. Yeah.
Yeah. And then it's also interesting because in the mid 80s, you changed gears and you got into film and TV composing. So, how did that sort of start for you?
Well, interestingly enough, it's always about making a living, and especially when you're young. And so we had great success with Sometimes When We Touch in 1977 into 78. And that actually got us a deal with Clive Davis, who had Arista Records at that point and was very hot. He moved us to Los Angeles. And I spent 3 years in LA producing different things for Clive and other people. And at that point, I had married my Toronto sweetheart, and we wanted to have children. And we didn't want to raise them in LA. We felt that LA was potentially a really hard place for children to be children. So in 81, after a few frustrating months, maybe half a year of really big sort of career disappointments, I said, "Let's go back to Toronto. I miss it," and she was from Toronto. And I said, "Plus, if you want to have kids, I don't want to have them here." So we moved back in 81. And I thought when I would move back to Toronto in 81 that I would be welcomed with a homecoming parade. And it was more like, "Oh, you're back." Crickets, crickets, and more crickets. And
Mhm.
and I didn't really have a lot of love being shown to me for someone who was coming back home. But I did a few projects, but at the same time, I had to make a living. And things were a little bit tough. And my career is all about, hey, Fred, will you try this? And the answer is, yeah, I'll give it a shot. And so I would get those kind of phone calls. Hey, Fred, we're doing a movie about, a TV movie about whatever, it could be about a high school narc. And would you do the music for it? And they knew my background as a record producer and a musician. So what they thought was, well, maybe he can do film music too. And you know what? I had to learn while I earned. And on this one, which then, from 85 till about 2001, I scored television almost nonstop, sometimes 3 series at once, all, my fingers on the keyboards and no one to help me except me. So it was very, very long hours in the day, every day, alone, with the picture and my music to that picture. And the deadlines were intense, crazy, but the money was wonderful.
Mm-hmm. And that kind of leads into what I wanted to ask you about, like the process of creating a soundtrack. Are you like, do they send you, the video and you're able to kind of, match the mood of the scene, or are you going in blind sometimes?
Well, it's a very, first of all, I did a lot of TV series, a lot of dramatic series. And so the norm would be, and by the way, a lot of US series were being shot in Toronto. So I was Canadian content as well as being an American. So the norm would be that you would probably have to deliver a show every 10 days about. And so on a series like Friday the 13th, the series, this is back in 87, 88, 89, when we did the 3 years, you would have a meeting once the picture was actually edited and locked, that episode. And then you would meet with the different people in post-production. There'd be a post-production supervisor. There would be, the directors were never there because they were onto other projects by then. But one of the producers would be there, and people doing sound effects and voice replacement things. And we'd all sit around the table and watch the episode and make our notes. And of course, at times the producer would say, I'd like music here. And I said, oh, you really want it there? And I'd write my notes down. And, you have to be a team player in TV and film score.
Mm-hmm.
You're not on your own. And then after we did this spotting session, is what we called it, then everybody would go back to their studios or their homes or whatever and do their work. And I had a studio at home full of, banks of synthesizers and samplers and a big TV screen in front of me. And I would just sit there and I would improvise music to each scene and then build on that improvisation until I had a great cue. And once I had the great cue, then I'd overdub on top of it and finish it. And then later on, it would get mixed by my mixer and myself, and we deliver it to the show about a day before it went on the air. So again, that was sort of the process for many of the series. I think it's probably a little more long distance now, where people probably can Zoom a meeting, or people can just not even bother and they just send their spotting notes and do what they do. But I did look forward to those team involvements.
Mm-hmm. And kind of on the spot here, I was just thinking, like, what happens if they weren't, they were like, oh, actually, we don't really like how this sounds. Can you go back and change it last minute? Did that ever happen? Or
Yes, of course, it happened a couple of times, but very few times. Because once you're on a TV series and you've got like 22 episodes, and again, everyone's just on the treadmill getting these things done. Once they trust you, so once after the first couple of episodes, then really no one really has any complaints. And also, if you're good, you know exactly what they want. Even though I know it's hard to explain to some people, but for I know they're going to like a lot of percussion in this scene, and I know they're going to like the it was just you again, it's all about instinct, isn't it? It's all about that part of it.
abs-
But the answer is sure. Over the years, um, I got a few phone calls, or would be at a mix and someone would say, Fred, gee, we don't like that cue, and I'd say, no worries, let me go back and do something else, or let's grab something else from somewhere else in the movie or from last week's. But yeah, it happens. But for me, it happened only a few times.
right. Yeah. And then, into the late 90s, you kind of got back into producing again. But you didn't entirely leave film and TV behind, because it's interesting how you had a long relationship with Disney. So how did that come together for you?
Well, in one of the last years of me composing TV and film out of Toronto, I think it must have been 1999, I got a phone call from Jay Landers, who has always been sort of an incredible supporter of my creativity and my art, and he was always an A&R man at different record labels, and I think in '99 is when he moved to Disney, Walt Disney Records, and he had come up with an idea along with a assistant of his or a colleague of his to do an instrumental lullaby album for to putting little kids to sleep using mostly Disney music. And so, again, he said, "Would you wanna do something like this?" And I said, "Well, I'll try," but I probably didn't say, "I'll try." I said, "Of course I will."
Yeah.
In my head, I'm saying, "I hope I can do this." And interestingly enough, it's one of my most successful, situations because there's 7 other instrumental lullaby albums that came out of that, and the first one, Disney Lullaby Album, is probably, I mean, there's probably 60 million streams every other month or something on the music for that. And what it is just very meditative. I hate to use the words new age, but meditative new age, very, very calming versions of like piano and strings, no vocals, instrumental, just piano and strings or guitar and strings and a little couple little bells here and there. But it's made purposely to let the child drift to sleep. And I'm doing songs like, Someday My Prince Will Come, or I'll do my version of Brahms' Lullaby, or I'll do a version of the Beatles' I Will. But you do them all again. I would arrange them in a way that they were just these very, very calming versions, but they were still very musical. And thank you for asking about it because it really has been one of my favorite things to have done. I've put a lot of kids to sleep, so I guess my music puts people to sleep.
Yeah. And it was also interesting because like I looked through your discography and stuff, and there was other Disney related albums in there, for things like Cars and Lilo and Stitch and High School Musical, and it was funny for me to see all that because I'm a child of the 2000s, so I saw all that stuff on TV growing up, and yeah, it goes to show how long you've been around, like that, going back to like Dan Hill and then, the more present day stuff as well.
Well, it has been a long musical life, and it continues. So I'm very, very proud of that. When I did a lot of the work for Disney on the lullaby stuff, then I started to get more work from them to do what we called sort of associated albums. So, in other words, the Lilo and Stitch movie would come out, or Finding Nemo would come out, and there would be the soundtrack from those things. And then I would do an associated album with like songs inspired by the movie, but they would still sell wonderfully back then. I mean, that's when records were selling still.
Hmm.
And so I did so many of those, and I wrote a lot of songs on them. That when Jay Landers decided to leave Disney, his A&R position at Disney, I called him. I said, "Hey, I'm sort of interested in taking your place because I know the company pretty well." And he wrote me a lovely letter, which was part of the thing to his boss, and I wound up doing a year and a half of leading Walt Disney in their A&R department for their children's music, and it was a wonderful experience for me on many levels, and on many levels, working for a company that was that big, it was like working for IBM or something, and it was definitely my last corporate thing I'll ever do.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah,
Now, I just thought of this, but when you work for Disney, do you get free entry into Disneyland?
you do.
Oh wow,
Yeah, you
nice.
actually do. I mean, I never took it. I mean, maybe I might have gone twice or something, but yes, you get a special pass. Yeah, yeah.
Right on. Yeah. And going back to kind of what we were talking about, like how you've been able to have such a lengthy career. I was kind of curious, since you've been able to make records on both analog and digital. Which format do you sort of prefer to work with?
Again, these are great questions. Thank you. My it's an interesting thing here, and I write about it in the book. Um, because you're young and because your whole life is a digital life. My life grew up on tape, in an analog tape life, and so my ears are suited more towards the warmth of analog. And so my frame of reference of what sounds good is what I sort of grew up with, meaning the warmth of analog tape and not digital. However, digital has so far surpassed the sonic capabilities of analog that you don't need to go back to tape to make it sound as good, if not better, and as warm and as whatever. I mean, the technology is fantastic. So what was great about technology for me was that once we went to digital and really got good at it, my engineers do it, by the way, I'm not an engineer. It just made my life so much better, and things got done so much faster, and you could fix things so much more beautifully. And so it takes a lot of the pressure off the old school. I mean, I've been producing people. I produced Johnny Mathis. I think he's done 138 albums for Columbia. He's the longest running artist in Columbia's history. He's 90. And, he started off in the 50s when he would sing in a little sort of cordoned off area of the studio with the orchestra right there, everything going directly to one track. And that was in the 50s. And now we're here in 2025. And, that's as foreign as going to the moon. But can you imagine the pressure that he would have having to sing in tune beautifully the whole 9 yards with an orchestra right behind him? And if he screws up or if they screw up, you got to do it again.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so I caught the last part of that in the early 70s. We were doing multi-track recording, and that was pretty great because back in the 50s they didn't have that, but we had it. But it still had problems, and all sorts of problems in the mix because mixing was not computerized. And so, yeah, no, I'm just a great lover of technology for recording because it makes my life as a producer really fail safe, and that's a wonderful thing for the artist as well. Takes the pressure off of them. And again, as far as the sonic situations, I mean, I defy you to listen to records I do and say what was done on tape and what wasn't, because there's no difference. Because
Mm-hmm.
it's my ears and my engineers' ears, and if they're sort of more tuned to an analog sound, digital can reproduce that.
For sure. Yeah. And I thought this would be a fun question to ask because it's just looking at all of the artists you've had the chance to work with. It's so impressive. Like there was an album you did with Jimmy Webb called Just Across the River, where it was like every song had an amazing special guest on it. So like what if there's like one artist where for you where you were kind of like, oh man, I'm in the same room as this person right now. Who would that be for you? You
Oh,
think?
I had so many. I mean, one of the things, Jackson, that I've been so fortunate to be a part of is that I've done so many duets over the years, and many of the duet partners are people who are just, my heroes. And so I loved working with Billy Joel. Billy and I became a little bit friendly during the two duets that I did. Both were well, actually, the first one was an overdub in New York on the Just Across the River record, and he did Wichita Lineman and overdubbed his duet part with Jimmy Webb on that, and we had a ball. And then about a year later, I was doing a Christmas album with Johnny Mathis, and I called Billy and I said, "Would you sing on this?" And he was like, "Oh my God, yeah, yeah." And that one we did actually live in the studio with Billy and Johnny, and did it old school, and it was just magnificent and so much fun. But I've worked with so many people. I mean, literally, the list is very deep, and many of them are people that I really looked up to and was absolutely thrilled. Like, for instance, Joe Cocker. I just always have loved Joe Cocker. He's going to be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame finally. But only about 6 months before he died, we did a duet on the second Jimmy Webb duets album, Still Within the Sound of My Voice. We did a beautiful version of Moon's a Harsh Mistress, and we did that with Jimmy and Joe overdubbed his part. And I remember being in tears hearing him sing. It was so emotional and so great. But
Mm-hmm.
there's so many. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And you alluded to it a few times in the interview, but you've got a new book out now called Unplugged. What made you want to put a book together?
I'd love to say it was for money, but no, it wasn't for that. It was really for I just wanted to put my stories down on paper. I felt they should be shared. And it turned out to be a long, like what I would do, I think initially in 2018, I'd talk into my iPhone and I would dictate stories just so I wouldn't forget them. Even because sometimes, you forget the little things. And my hard drive up here gets full. So I wanted to start to dictate these stories. Then I'd take them home and I would edit them and I'd correct them. And I had about 20 of them in 2019 maybe. And I said to myself, I think I could write a book. And boy, that was a terrible mistake because then I had to write the book. And it was a really long haul, especially the past year. In the past year, I had to get very serious about putting it all together properly. And I keep on telling people it's my first book and my last book.
Yeah.
And but I'm so proud of it, and it's called Unplugged. And thank you for helping spread the word on it. But yeah, it's a story of my life in music. It's not really a memoir that goes into deep personal stuff, but there is some personal stuff in there, of course. But it really is about the wonderful role I've had with so many wonderful artists and so many wonderful projects that I just wanted to share the behind the scenes.
Yeah. And you mentioned talking into an iPhone, telling these stories. Is that kind of how you wrote the book? Like you kind of had to talk it out first and then put it to paper?
Yeah, I really had to do that. That was the best way for me to write the book. I would dictate chapters and then edit them and get them better later.
Mm-hmm. And how is it? Have you found any similarities between writing a book and making a record?
None.
Yeah.
No, none. With a record, I'm done in a month, on an
true.
album. And plus, I'm also working for the artist. I'm there to facilitate their dream and their vision, or to help them find their vision. This was all about me, and it was also a good 5.5 years of on and off, involvement in making this thing. So no, there was no relationship whatsoever.
Gotcha. Yeah. All right, Fred. Well, we are now entering into the guessing segment of this podcast here. So okay. I'll explain the rules to you and any new listeners we may have. So
okay.
In this bag here is a record from my collection. I'm going to give you 3 clues about this album, and then we play a game of 20 questions to try and figure out what the album is. So, yeah. Fred Mollin, are you ready to guess that record?
I'm going to give it my best shot. Yeah.
All right, here we go. So the 3 clues are: this album came out in the 1970s. It was the breakthrough album for this artist, and this was the best-selling album ever on Columbia Records at the time of its release. Question 1.
Is it Boz Scaggs?
It's not Boz, no.
Just checking.
Question 2. We had, that reminds me, we had David Paich on the podcast a while back, and we talked about that record with Boz.
I love that. That's great. I love David. So it was the best-selling record in the 70s. Is it a group?
It is a solo artist. Question 3.
Columbia Records solo artist. See, I should be good at this in the 70s. Okay, give me another hint.
We have spoken about this artist in this interview.
Billy Joel.
It is Billy Joel. And, of course, the album...
The Stranger.
Is...
The Stranger.
Just got to get it out here. The Stranger. Yeah. So what...
That wasn't too bad.
No, not at all. What can you tell the listeners about The Stranger?
Oh, I think that was a watershed album, absolutely. I remember being in Toronto and buying that record. I mean, I was a big record collector and I a big listener, and I was a big fan of Billy Joel's. So that was his breakthrough record, where everyone started to really take him seriously. I had been following him way before that and had seen him play live a lot. But that record, I think, just happened to catch. It was very New York. There was a scenes from an Italian restaurant song, and
Moving Out.
it really just it had a sort of sense of this is where I'm from, and it had Just the Way You Are on it, which of course knocked us out of the top spot on Sometimes When We Touch, because I think Just the Way You Are also won the Grammy for Best Vocal Performance, which we were up for. But again, it's very hard to deny that song and its success. So that album, I think, just really between Phil Ramone's production and Billy's songwriting, which was really at a peak there, and the performance of the band, everything about that record, it was obvious that the timing was going to be perfect.
Mm-hmm. And it had to be perfect because all of his previous records before The Stranger hadn't really met expectations sale wise. So I think for Billy, it was kind of a last chance to make something happen. And it sort of seems like whenever that does happen, that's when the artist finally hits their stride. Like Bruce Springsteen was in a similar situation, and I think we've seen that time and time again over the years. And like maybe the pressure of it all produced some great songs. But
Yeah, and I think that was the first album that Ramone produced. Is that right?
that's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, again, I only met Phil a couple times, but very New York guy, very, Italian New York. And Billy would have really understood that guy really well, and they would have understood each other. So it was just a really good pairing. Billy had different producers, and he tried to produce himself. And, I think the Ramone years were really big years because clearly there was an understanding of how to make a joyful experience and make a great record.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the first one, which makes sense. Yeah.
And I really think, like, for me, it's probably one of my favorite records. And the reason why I say that is because, like, the first band that I was truly into when I was a kid was the Beatles. And, from probably about 11 until 13, in that age range, the Beatles were all I listened to. Like, nothing else was good enough for me at that time. But I remember being on a vacation, and my mom had got The Stranger on iTunes and put it on her iPod. And I think, like, in passing, I heard Only the Good Die Young, and that immediately, like, oh, that sounds good. And then I stole the iPod and listened to the record for the rest of that trip we were on. And so The Stranger was in that period where I was, like, only into the Beatles. It was like the one record from someone else that broke through for me. So I think that really goes to show, like, how strong the songs are. Like, there's really nothing weak on the record at all.
No, there's nothing. But also, Billy, just like a lot of us, our lives changed when the Beatles hit. And so I think Billy is 3 years older than me. So he would have been 14 when the Beatles hit. And we're on Ed Sullivan February 9th, 1964. And I was 11 when they were on the Ed Sullivan Show. And my life changed. The world changed at that point. So Billy is very inspired and influenced by the Beatles. So it's no surprise that you understood that here was a person who was truly, in the back of his mind, trying to do something as good.
Yeah, absolutely. I never even thought of it that way. So that's a good way to put it.
He was this, he was very much just super inspired.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite song off of The Stranger, you would say, or favorite songs?
Well, I love them all. It's hard not to love the scenes from an Italian restaurant, just because it's got all those different. It's like a medley of things, and it's just so much fun to listen to. But I love them all. I mean, again, I haven't listened to the record in its entirety in a while. I probably should, but obviously, it's very hard not to love Just the Way You Are, because, even though there's been 1,000 covers of it and it's turned into sort of, elevator music, it wasn't elevator music when it came out. It was really just a really cool song that had a jazz thing to it. And I always loved that record. It's a great record.
Yeah. And I felt like I had to talk about Billy because, just with your connection to him, but also my connection to him. Last year, he was performing in Seattle. I'm in Calgary, so Seattle's kind of the easy trip. And I had never seen him live before, so it was my first time seeing him in concert. But the cool thing was that I was able to set up an interview with his drummer, Chuck Berge, which we did the day before the show on this podcast. And then Chuck ended up inviting us to the band's after party following the show, which was really like, it really felt like kind of my first sort of rock and roll moment to, like be hanging out with the band after they played for a baseball stadium's worth of people. So that was pretty cool. I didn't meet Billy while we were there, but we met all the people he plays with, which was pretty cool.
Yeah, it's a great, his band for the past number of years are so damn good.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I guess to kind of wrap things up here, what in the times you've kind of spent working with him, what do you think's been like a memorable story you've had with Bill?
I don't know if it's a memorable story. It was a memorable moment. I remember when we were doing the Johnny Mathis duet. Billy flew in for that so he could do it with John and the band on the floor. And that was in Nashville, I think probably 2011. And Billy flew himself in on his private jet. And Johnny and Billy really loved each other right away. And they were big fans of each other. And we did a song which is known as the Christmas song, which is Chestnuts Roasting on an Open Fire.
Mm-hmm.
Gorgeous song. And I created a duet for both of them, that they would swap verses and do harmonies and stuff like that. And I had Billy in one booth and Johnny in another, where they could sort of see each other, but still be isolated sound-wise. And there's a part of the song where it modulated, and Johnny would have to go very, very high, And I just remember looking at Billy when Johnny, at age whatever he was at that point, 83 maybe or something, or maybe he was, I don't even know, maybe 80, still with that same gorgeous, beautiful, high voice of John's. He never lost his voice. He still hasn't lost his voice. And I just remember looking at Billy when Johnny hit the high note, and he looked at me, and I'll take off my glasses because he went, and that face I'll never forget.
Yeah.
Was that Billy Joel was looking at me going, oh my God, like this is the greatest singer. How can he be this old and sound that young and hit those notes? And he just made that face. And I was like, that's a great face. I wish I had a photo of that face.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you got the memory of it, which is
very vivid,
pretty cool.
Very vivid memory. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Fred, we have reached the end of the interview. I want to thank you for taking the time to be on the podcast today. It was super cool to learn about your career and hear some of your stories.
Well, you're most kind, and I thank you so much. And say hi to Canada for me.
Absolutely. And where can people follow you and get your book?
Well, the shameless plug is if you want an autographed copy, there's a website which is Fred Mollin, Mollin, Unplugged.com. And you can order through that website, and they get the books to me, and I sign them or inscribe them if you want. And if you just want to buy through Amazon or Barnes & Noble, just the normal situations, or go to your local bookstore and ask for it.
Sounds good. Yeah. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Guess That Record. Make sure to leave a 5-star review wherever you listen and tell your friends to check us out. I want to shout out our radio partners currently airing Guess That Record as a syndicated show. CKMS in Kitchener, Ontario, CKXU in Lethbridge, Alberta, and South Devon Sound in Kingsbridge, UK. So if you're in those markets, be sure to check out those stations to hear Guess That Record on the radio. If you're with a radio station and you'd be interested in adding Guess That Record to your programming, send us an email to guessthatrecordpodcast@gmail.com. We'd also appreciate it if you follow us on Instagram and TikTok, where our username on both platforms is @GuessThatRecord. And lastly, subscribe to our YouTube channel to see the video versions of these amazing interviews. Remember to keep rocking, and we'll see you on the next episode of Guess That Record.